I thought that the tide had shifted and people had moved away from arguing Christmas is pagan in origin. And maybe I just haven't been on social media this time of year in the past couple of years that I didn't notice that people still make the argument. And I was surprised by that. So I wanted to make a video specifically about that claim that Christmas has pagan origins, because there's a lot of good information that rebuts that. Now, if somebody doesn't want to celebrate for personal reasons, a personal conviction, I don't mind. If somebody believes the holiday has become too commercialized and there's too much of an emphasis on gifts and Santa and things like that, I could agree with that. Again, my focus is on the claim that the origins, specifically of the date of December 25th, are pagan in origin, that the Christmas holiday is a supplanting of some previous pagan holiday. And so we're going to look at a couple of articles and snippets from books, and I'll try to make the PDFs available so you can read them in their larger context, as well as I'll try to timestamp the video so you can move around if you need to. And we're going to take myself off the screen because nobody wants to see me. And we'll begin here with this article by I don't know how to say his last name. His first name is Carl, so we'll just call him that. But the article is The Origins of the Christmas Date, Some Recent Trends in Historical Research. So this is actually a really good article for the overview of the idea about December 25th, where it comes from. And he points out that there are two competing approaches, what he calls the history of religions theory, which is basically that idea, the one that you run into all the time, like online, that Christmas was chosen to be on December 25th to supplant some previous pagan holiday and that kind of idea. The calculation theory basically says that the early Christians attempted to calculate the date based off of chronologies and evidence within the text and things like that. There was a highly typological approach to this, but it did have a history and people did try to do this. So others think that that's where the December 25th date was chosen. It was for those reasons. And he begins this article by pointing out where these ideas kind of came from, where the history of kind of questioning December 25th came from. And it was early Reformation era, specifically Calvinists, that began to attack the dates, the historical basis for the feast and December 25th, Christmas in particular. And what he calls the history of religions theory, I'm just going to call replacement, because that's kind of more colloquially, I think, what people think of, that Christmas replaced some previous holiday. And then calculation theory, he says, roughly speaking, proponents of replacement interpret Christmas as a Christianized version or substitute for pagan celebrations that took place on the same date in the Roman calendar. The most widely cited example being the birthday of Sol Invictus on December 25th. Now, you'll come across other claims like Saturnalia and Mithra and things like that, and even some wilder ones like Horus and some random other deities. Those can basically just be dismissed outright, because Saturnalia was December 17th. It went on a week, but it never touched the 25th. The only thing going for it is it's kind of close to Christmas, but that's really weak. I don't know why anyone would even try to make that argument. Similarly, Mithra is just, and other deity birth dates on December 25th are just made up. There is zero evidence that that is the birthday of any deity. And Mithra in particular is odd because what we know of it is post-Christianity. So the idea that Christians were taking from Mithra and doing their own Christian versions of those things is odd, because we don't know anything about it prior to Christianity. So you could just as easily make the reverse argument that Mithra was copying Christianity. So it's a meaningless argument. But the only one with any teeth is this Sol Invictus one. And so this is the scholarly historical origin of the replacement theory, is Sol Invictus on December 25th. Now, it's not quite so easy to just make that simple statement, as we're going to see. And he begins here with Talley for the calculation theory, who wrote in 1986, The Origins of the Liturgical Year. Talley essentially holds that Christmas on December 25th was derived from the day of Christ's Passion, for which commemorative dates in the Julian calendar had already been established in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries. Assuming that Christ spent a perfect number of years in the flesh, Christian scholars established a chronological parallelism between the conception in Mary's womb, Annunciation, and his death on the cross, which were both assigned to March 25th, the Roman date of the vernal equinox. And of course, from March 25th, you count up 9 months, you get December 25th. This process of chronological elaboration, Talley suggests, may have already come to an end by the beginning of the 4th century, since the Donatist sect, which split from the mainline church in North Africa in circa 311, seems to have already acknowledged this nativity date in their liturgy. So the point being, you had the Donatist schism happen, and they kept earlier feast days but not later ones. And they had a December 25th nativity. So logically speaking, by 311, Christians were already celebrating the nativity on December 25th. Now he's going to continue, and he points out that as influential as Talley has been in liturgical history and theology, it's basically not penetrated to the mainstream. Continental scholars and those who approach the subject of Christmas from the disciplinary viewpoints of ancient history and comparative religion, and also the general public, continue to favor the aforementioned history of religions theory, in other words, replacement, whose modern formulation is to a large extent owed to the German philologist Hermann Usener, who was, incidentally, one of the pioneers in the modern academic study of religion. And so a lot of this goes back to Usener, who wrote specifically this kind of stuff, dealing with this in the late 1800s, 1889, I think specifically. Usener regarded the institution of Christmas as a particularly significant example of how certain elements of Christianity originally developed out of an ancient pagan context. So he just saw this as an example of that larger theme. And so he saw it as some form of syncretism, pagan monotheism, things like that. Now, a lot of this has been challenged, specifically by Hijmans, who we'll hit momentarily. And so scrubbing down, Usener's thesis has enjoyed widespread acclaim ever since its publication in 1889, with the result that many later scholars have tended to rather uncritically embrace its basic conclusions. And then he goes on to point out how, as is often the case, that nuance has been lost. And specifically, he cites how kind of more mainstream people will bring up the idea that Constantine instituted the date, and is saying that that really doesn't work. Aside from the lack of evidence, the thesis completely fails to account for the fact that Constantinople, the city inaugurated by Constantine himself in 330 as the new capital for his empire, had to wait until 380 for the actual introduction of this feast. Basically, there's just no evidence for that. He continues that studies emphasizing the pagan roots of Christmas have been fraught with a certain tendency towards confirmation bias, has recently been argued by Stephen Hijmans, whose research into the iconography of the sun in Roman religion has paved the way for a critical reevaluation of replacement theory. Using numismatic, which is like coin studies, archaeological, epigraphic, and literary evidence from the 2nd to 4th centuries, Hijmans is able to show that the idea of Christmas being preceded by a popular and important feast dedicated to the sun god is to a considerable extent founded on anachronisms and a view of Roman religion that rests on 19th century constructs rather than hard facts. His skeptical and revisionist conclusions also demolish the thesis that Sol Invictus was a new and distinct deity. And this is what people like Usener were more or less arguing, whose cult was imported from the East in the 3rd century, became the occasion of a major festival on December 25th. So he basically destroys this idea. And so now we're going to get to the meat of the argument that Usener and others that see this connection between Christmas and the pagan festival. A lot of this comes from this Chronograph of 354, a unique late Roman collection of chronological texts, which includes a civil calendar documenting some of the Roman festivals that were celebrated in the middle of the 4th century. The entry of December 25th reads, Birthday of Invictus, 30 chariot races. This has generally been accepted as a feast in honor of Sol, despite the fact that the epithet Invictus is by no means exclusive to the sun god. If a connection between the cult of Sol Invictus and Christmas has nevertheless been drawn, this is chiefly because the same chronograph also contains a register of Christian martyrs, ordered according to their date of burial, which is headed by the birth of Christ in Bethlehem on December 25th. So the same document has both of these entries. Since this so-called deposition of martyrs is attached to a similar list of Roman bishops, whose original version seems to date from 336, this year has been often cited as the terminus ad quem for the institution of Christmas. And so the section dealing with the Christian martyrs and bishops and things like that, because of the content, it gets dated to 336, despite the fact that this chronograph, think of it almost like an almanac, is from 354. And so this is actually rather important because, as he's pointing out here, you have to look at this then, the 336 date, as it can't be any later than this. Christians were celebrating in 336. What's interesting, though, is we're going to find that this chronograph here is actually the first reference to any pagan celebration on December 25th, any celebration of the sun. But, as is pointed out here, it actually never mentions the sun god specifically. And so I want to jump to Hijmans here in a moment, but this concluding remark is interesting. As it happens, the calendar in the chronograph of 354 is our earliest source for a corresponding festival on December 25th. And it is perhaps significant that the practice of having chariot races rather than sacrifices on major festivals, which is noted in the Invictus entry above, was itself not older than the 320s. So even if you're going to argue, hey, we had almost like special pleading here, even though this is generally how scholars look at this, that the Christian date, even though it's in 354, the document or whatever, it's from 354, the Christian section is dated to 336. So maybe this celebration was earlier too. Well, it couldn't have been earlier than 320 because of the entry about it being chariot races. But there are actually a number of problems with this entry. And so here is a extraction from Hijmans' article, but I want to hit down once he starts talking specifically about the entry. Now, it should be noted that the 354 reference is our first actual reference, but people do try to take the institution back to Aurelian in 274. But the evidence for that is lacking. So I'm just going to read through the highlighted portions for us here. The contention that December 25th was an especially popular festival for Sol in late antiquity is equally unfounded. And he points out here that Aurelian did build a new temple, and he did some things for the cult of the sun. So he's saying a new festival on December 25th would not have been out of place in this context. But it must be stressed, contrary to Usener, that there is no evidence that Aurelian instituted a celebration of Sol on that day. A feast day for Sol on December 25th is not mentioned until 80 years later in the calendar of 354 and subsequently in 362 by Julian. And I love this paragraph here. In short, while the winter solstice on or around the 25th of December was well established in the Roman imperial calendar, there is no evidence that a religious celebration of Sol on that day antedated the celebration on Christmas, and none that indicates that Aurelian had a hand in its institution. One might think that celebrating the sun on the winter solstice is so self-evident that we need hardly doubt that such a festival had a long tradition. But what evidence we have actually belies that notion? And he points out the traditional dates for Sol were August 8th and or 9th, possibly August 28th and December 11th. These are all dates that are unrelated to any important celestial alignments of Sol, such as solstices and equinoxes. That's actually going to become an important note. And here he's going to get deep into the weeds concerning specifically the idea that Aurelian instituted this in 274. And he concludes down here, after all that lengthy discussion, he says, and thus we can rule out December 25th as the date of Aurelian's games for Sol. That's important because you will just see this point conceded over and over. Even among the Christians that will do apologetics on this issue, I've actually seen them just concede that point that Aurelian did institute in 274 games on December 25th, but the evidence doesn't bear that out. So really, the calendar of 354 is going to be our first reference, but even that has problems. He summarizes here, the calendar of 354 mentions the following three festivals of Sol. August 28th, Sol and Luna, 24 chariot races. October 19th through 22nd, 36 chariot races. December 25th, Natalis Invicti, 30 chariot races. Now, the reason why this is going to become relevant is further down below. He's pointing out here, December 25th is one of 4 festivals in the calendar out of 63 not to have the canonical 24 races. What is more, it is the only race day of the year on which the number of chariot races was not a multiple of 12. So 1 out of 63. A further anomaly is the fact that the calendar here also does not mention Sol by name, as it does for August 28th, October 19th, and October 22nd, but only by the epithet Invictus. In the calendar, the term Natalis, anniversary or celebration, which can be used for emperors, gods, and heroes, and even events, is invariably followed by the primary name or term used to identify the emperor, god, or event whose Natalis is celebrated. The single exception to this rule is here. And so, while it's assumed that this is a reference to the birth of the sun or an anniversary celebration of the sun, it doesn't mention the sun. Really odd. Add to this, the date celebrated the winter solstice of the Julian calendar, while astronomically important, had no significance that we know of in the Roman religious practices associated with the sun god. And this is a point that he was hitting on earlier, was these other dates were not astronomically significant. August 8th, August 9th, the 28th, December 11th, and then the October dates, none of those had astronomical significance. But December 25th is the solstice. So it's like, why did they suddenly choose an astronomically significant date? And so he concludes the entry for December 25th is in every way problematic. So this is our earliest reference, but it doesn't even mention the sun by name, and it looks really suspect. He continues, the only other reference to a solar festival on December 25th is Julian's hymn to King Helios. And as we have seen, it too is not without problems. That was earlier in the section. In particular, Julian tries rather too hard and with untenable arguments to convince us that the winter solstice Sol games had been celebrated in Rome since Numa, and Numa was a much earlier emperor. This suggests that the opposite may have been true, and that a festival for Sol on December 25th was actually quite new. This could explain the anomalies of the entry for December 25th in the calendar of 354, as it may then be a later insertion into the existing template for the calendar. It would also explain why December 25th was the sole festival of Sol to fall on an astronomically significant date. None of this tells us when the Natalis Invicti of December 25th entered the Roman calendar, but on this evidence we must acknowledge that it is a real possibility that it did not do so until after the Bishop of Rome first celebrated Christmas on that day, a pagan reaction to a Christian feast, perhaps, rather than vice versa. And so that's more or less the replacement theory argument. To me, it utterly fails. Your first reference to a pagan celebration is in 354, after the accepted 336 Christmas date. And that pagan reference is deeply problematic, as we've seen. But what about calculation theory? How far back can we go? Well, generally 2 names come up in this discussion. Julius Africanus and Hippolytus, and both had similar dates. So you're talking about 160 to about 240. Now, both have been thrown out generally in contemporary scholarship, but it should be noted that the first article we read from, the author mentions in a footnote upcoming unpublished work he was doing to defend December 25th in Africanus's work. And as far as Hippolytus goes, he was defended recently in published work. And so we'll take a look at that. But first, I want to take a look at this section from Talley's book. This is page 86. And he writes, however, there seems to be no basis at present on which we can depend on the 4th book of Hippolytus's commentary on Daniel for help in establishing the origin of the feast of the Nativity of Christ on December 25th. So he was interacting with the Hippolytus thing, and he basically says, we can't really know for sure. And it's from there he's going to launch into a discussion about the Donatists. And he actually ends up giving a date of 243 to 311 for a possible origin, if you accept that information about the Donatists. But part of the reason why I wanted to launch into that discussion about Hippolytus from Talley's book is because he wrote that in 1986. So roughly 30 years later, we're going to have this. So I just kind of wanted to show you that in 30 years, a lot can change. And remember, when you're dealing with the replacement theory, much of that goes back to 1889 specifically. So that's over 100-year-old scholarship, and it just really hasn't moved. It's just been assumed, accepted, and gone on from there, presupposed. But in this article by Thomas Schmidt, who actually has published the most recent work on Hippolytus, he actually accepts this date of December 25th, and he argues for its inclusion. So even though previous scholarship, you'll come across that quite a bit when Hippolytus is brought up, that, it was probably some later interpolation. Well, the most recent work done by somebody who is doing work specifically on this guy does actually accept the date. But the article here is super technical. So I'm not really going to bother going through it because that would just take too long. Because part of the difficulty with it is this is basically our term Genesis. Think of like the genealogy in Matthew. And so there's question about, does it mean birth or does it mean conception? And this kind of stuff becomes relevant because he's going to argue through this that calculations in his Chronicon and canon indicate that Hippolytus thought the world was created on March 25th, meaning that he likely believed that Jesus was born on December 25th, so 9 months after that. And it gets super, super detailed. And this is one thing worth noting that I think gets lost in this, because I've had these discussions recently with people. My concern is with people that say the date was picked, the festival was made to replace pagan festivals and dates and things like that. And so I just want to show that that's nonsense. There isn't evidence for that. And I do believe the calculation theory is correct. They came up with December 25th because of these various calculations they were doing. Now, this says nothing about the accuracy of those calculations. If you follow my channel at all, you know that I take September 11th, 3 BC date for Jesus' birth, which would be the New Year, the Day of Trumpets. I know recently a lot of people have been taking tabernacles. I've been seeing that a lot, which would be, I think, 2 weeks after. But it should be noted, it doesn't matter how outlandish we might find their calculations. Again, they're getting into the date, the day of the creation of the world. And it gets into arbitrary things like the fourth day of creation. That's when the sun, moon, and stars are created. So we need to move the day forward or back, 4 days because of that. And it just gets super into the weeds. But for my purposes here, it doesn't matter how convoluted we might find their arguments. The point is that's how they came up with the date. And it has nothing to do with Sol Invictus or Saturnalia or Mithra or any other deity. It came by trying to calculate really when the crucifixion happened and then counting up from there. That's why you get a possible date of April 6th as a crucifixion date. And then you get January 6th, 9 months from that, as what later becomes Epiphany in more Eastern circles. But I will go ahead and upload these if you want to go through all the gory details. But Merry Christmas, and I will see you guys next time.